Hey, everybody, we're back. Welcome to the Populist Patriot. Me is my handy co host, Herschel Miller. And I think what we're going to do is we are going to christen the shows of the Populist Patriot with Herschel and I. We're going to be calling it Life in the Toolshed in the Office. I'm here in my office area of my apartment. There's Herschel in his tool shed. So I think it gives a good urban and rural theme to it because it shows the unity of the white collar and the blue collar working class. So how the heck are you doing today, Herschel?
Oh, Nevin, I can't bitch. It's been a pretty good day. Uh, Last week of work went pretty good, all things considered. I can't complain about it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Been looking forward to the show. I have to say that.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it too. Without going into you really too many personal details. These past couple of months, off and on, have been very rough for me, uh, personally and emotionally. Still continuing to do my exercise, my paddleboarding, my kayaking, and whatnot. Still doing my reading and research. We have some exciting news to share about the show. Perhaps some future plans and events that we're attending. Some events and things that Herschel and I have been doing. So I think it's going to be a great episode. Um, Looking forward to the new year 2022. Hopefully, this will be a much better new year for all of us. But right now, I feel a lot better. I think I could close this year with cautious optimism that I think I've gained more clarity about things. So that is one good takeaway. I guess I could say about 2021 that I've gained more clarity, and in the long run, I think I have grown as a person. And when you stop growing as a person, that's, I guess, when you have problems. And the other watchword I'd like to point out is also sometimes crises, big and small, can also result in tremendous growth. And we have seen that for this country. Look at the Great Depression and the populist reforms of FDR that staved off a communist as well as a pro-Nazi takeover in the United States, for example. But now that we see today with the crisis of Reaganomics, the continued rise of Russia and communist China, and the various revisionist powers aligned with them, and we see with COVID, I mean, I take the position that COVID was a biological attack against the American people by the communist Chinese, quite possibly and allegedly. I mean, crisis has shown this country right now that right now we haven't pulled together fully enough. And the Trump administration really did not rise to the occasion on many fronts to really unify our people against China. And as far as the crafting of thoughtful policy and implementing a true nationalist and populist agenda. So I think at the end of the day, I do find that the people that I meet every day, whether at the workplace, at political conferences, just everyday people, friends, I find that we have a lot of capable young men and young, middle-aged, and older men and women that do have the picture of what's going on in this country, and they have creative problem-solving skills and suggestions. So, with that stated, perhaps in the next gigantic crisis, hopefully, we'll have these, more common sense people rise to the fore. So I think those are some takeaways for 2021 that I have personally experienced. And don't
Well,
worry, we're going to have shows before New Year's. Don't worry about it.
yeah. Well, and I was going to say is like we're definitely for all the audience, we're planning on doing a year in review because January 2nd marks the 1 year anniversary of this show that me and Nevin have started together. And nearly all of our media started with the first show nearly a year ago. And I have to say, Nevin, on my end, probably the biggest lesson that I've learned by far is that when you reach out across the political spectrum, when you find these people communist or right nationalist, or you find, and that was right nationalist, when you find these people And most of the time you think there's no way I can get along with them. There's no way that this person could ever agree to me on so many things. But, I find myself having these conversations, and they usually start with, me sending them a text message, hey, I'm from the Patriotic Populist. Do you have a minute to talk about stuff? And then we'll go from there. And I've met, chapter local presidents for the union, like Charles Daniels. I've met members of the Movement for People's Democracy up in West Virginia, two fine fellows, Jonah Cohn and Micah. I've met, presidential candidates. I've met, populist libertarians, and so many of these people. Mm-hmm. I find myself thinking that in a better world, none of us would ever have to be, that we'd all belong to one united political movement. Now, I understand the world that we live in is not perfect, and every day that we keep going, there's these divisions that we're going to find ourselves in. But I really, more than anything, this year has taught me to have a little faith in humanity itself, because, there's terrible, terrible people out in this world, and I won't deny that. But it seems like in every town I go to, and all these different people that I talk to, I find these good, genuinely good examples of humanity, of people that care about one another, people that want to see others do better, that want to help the weak and the needy. And it's not that I guess I didn't know that getting into this, but this platform has given me an opportunity to stretch out and to find people that in another life I never would have met. Most of the guys that I've talked to, most of the people that we've had on this show, Nevin himself, I would never would have known these people had it not been for the last year or two of politics that I've been involved in. So I have to say that going into 22, as everything, starts looking better, as the organization has grown and I'm always meeting new people, I can only imagine the adventures that are waiting for me on the other side of that.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying dovetails exactly with what I just said too as well, and I'm glad that it did, because, frankly, there's a lot of the everyday people that you and I meet out there of good faith. They're good patriots. They're concerned about the weaker elements in society that truly need help. I think that's gives me hope that perhaps in the next crisis, maybe these people will band together that we're talking about and create its own counterforce to confront the corporate-dominated neoliberal right, with all of their focus on materialism and greed is good, and trying to marry that with a socially conservative future, which is an unlikely formula. It's so contradictory. And then the extreme left and National Socialists, and many of the fascists who want an extreme, highly authoritarian, scientifically controlled society that suppresses all human freedoms. So we seek, of course, as I've said on other episodes of the Populist Patriot, a sort of fourth position. It's not Nazism and fascism. It's not communism. It's not uncontrolled corporate capitalism, libertarianism, Reaganomics. It is truly a fourth position. And I think when I come across people on all walks of life and also many different social situations, I think there are more people that silently agree with us. And that is very encouraging. And what shows like us hopefully will serve as one of many lightning rods to kind of unify those common sense, decent folks, if you will, truly to the flag. And so we wave the American flag here, so I got to have show props here. The other thing is when I got a question before New Year's, for our New Year's special. Check this out. You and me got to get beverages of choice.
Yeah.
Now I'm paddleboarding. I paddleboarded with a group last night, and I had a lot of fun. And I was talking with some of the people and stuff like that. One guy in particular, really cool. His name is Yalo. And he had me try White Claw. Oh my God. That shit is good. It is not potent. It's not bloating. So I think I think I'm gonna usher in the new year. I mean, I don't know, you and I'm sure we'll have plans and stuff like that. But on our show, I'm getting me some White Claw, and you have to have a beverage of choice because, man, I'm going to celebrate. We got to celebrate basically kissing 2021 goodbye and then say hello to a better 2022 for not only us, but for our national community, for the people of our nation. What do you think of that, Herschel?
Oh, I
Beverage
think
of
it's a
choice.
wonderful idea. Now, like I'm usually drinking, my American classic right here,
There
but
you go.
yeah, I might get a little top shelf. You never know, something to really celebrate with. But no, Nevin, I'd like to go back to, we're talking about meeting these people from all walks of life that agree with us. I think. See, I consider myself a fan of dialectics, or at least that line of thought that dialectics come from. And what I think you're seeing, and the reason that so many people are in the same train of thought is that for 40 years now, the main political thought that's been taught in schools and that's been pushed by think tanks, politicians, and business owners from the world is this idea of this gospel of Reaganism, of free market, and free borders, and free trade, and everything.
You had an episode of the Toolshed about that, by the way.
But I don't want to.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I wanted to plug that in.
Yeah, and I'd encourage the people to check it out. But I'll say this: like, I'm not wanting to rehash the entire discussion, but for 40 years, people in this country have been taught to think of one way, and that's that limited government is better government, that free markets are better markets, and that the way of thinking that you should think this way, that you should be this, otherwise you're anti-American. But the challenges of the day have been, how do we get people to have a better standard of living? How do we increase, or decrease the burden on people that have kids or get sick? Or how do we build an economy that will last for the next 40 years? These questions are asked by every ideology. Even the Reaganomics people, even the Reaganites, they think the same. They're going through the same thought process. They want to preserve their system because any system that refuses to adapt is a system that's destined for failure. But I think that from a dialectical perspective, as we're looking at these movements, as we're looking at these conversations that happen across the country, you're finding these people are coming to the same conclusion because we've all asked ourselves the same question: how do you increase pay? Well, it's unions. That's the shortest, simplest answer there is. Beyond that, you can talk about making sure that trying to increase American manufacturing. How do you decrease the burden on people that are sick or that have kids? Well, you fix our healthcare system either by nationalization or by some hybrid system of nationalization and private sector. But because we have all been faced with the same antithesis, which is Reaganism, I think that we've all found ourselves in a similar boat, that we realize that the communists that are fighting for the labor movement up in West Virginia are fighting against the same monster that the labor unions are fighting against in Michigan right now. The railroad workers are fighting, that we're fighting. And that makes it where you'd be amazed the allies you could find. Because at the end of the day, it's kind of what I've said in a recent interview I done. Like, I am fighting the same enemy that the communists are right now. That enemy being the billionaire class, the wealthy elite, the bankers, the corrupt politicians, these people that are more than happy to strip away the American way of life as long as it increases their profit margin by 2%. That's who we're all fighting. And when we're all fighting the same fight, it's only a matter of time before we realize that, hey, maybe that dude is worth working with. Maybe that guy that in different times I'd never consider could be a valuable ally to me. And I think as we continue to go forward, that is not going to go away. That we're going to meet more people that it'd say in better times we would never have thought of having a conversation with.
Well, yeah, I mean, personally, I mean, look, we're both ideologically anti-communist. I mean, I've cut my teeth in politics through my anti-communism and my interest in national security affairs, amongst other things. And what I've learned about communism and the appeal of communism and National Socialism and fascism in America, yes, those movements do attract power-hungry individuals, literal criminal types, psychopaths. There's no question about it. Malcontents, misfits. There's no question about it, particularly in the leadership class of those movements. But you also have a lot of individuals, in some who are leaders as well as many rank and file members, who join these movements. I don't want to say legitimate reasons necessarily, because that could be misconstrued badly. But like, let's take, for example, one of the founders and heads of the old Traditionalist Workers' Party. It's a neo-Nazi organization. And Matt Heimbach is his name. And the reason why he was radicalized was because in his native areas, I think he's from like the parts of the South, Appalachia or whatnot, he saw that there was deindustrialization, disinvestment in various services that help the rural people and whatnot, and the massive poverty. And that fuels the rise of the extreme left, as well as also these sort of third position totalitarian racist political parties and movements. And they feed on it. It's like gasoline. It's like Reaganism and the entire Tea Party agenda and the corporate Democrats. They're basically serve as the gasoline. And what's lighting it is people's discontentment. So people like Matthew Heimbach, people like some personal friends of ours that I won't name at this point, and others who join like communist movements, they have legitimate reasons. I mean, these feelings don't come about merely because the kids are not taught about the dangers of communism or the dangers of fascism or the need for tolerance of all Americans within the national community. That includes our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, our non-white brothers and sisters, et cetera, et cetera. The issue is that neoliberal market fundamentalism and globalism, the Tea Party, Reagan, Clinton agenda, has been destroying this country, destroying people's lives, responsible for helping to fuel a lot of the social maladies in American society, such as the opioid epidemic, drug abuse, crime, increased the continuation of abortion and whatnot. You don't solve these problems by banning it or just locking people up. Locking up the criminals and banning abortions, that only can take you so far. It doesn't attack the root of problems. And the same is with radicalization. Yes, you need to expose the radicals, particularly the ones that are tied with foreign powers, in my opinion at least. But that's only fighting half the battle. The other part of the battle, you have to win hearts and minds. A future government of our making, Herschel, we have to show ourselves that we have our people's back, our nation's back, basically supporting unswervingly our national interest as representing, fulfilling and tightening the organic unity of all classes within our nation. And frankly, also at times having an iron boot to the private sector oligarchs when they contravene the interests of the nation, when they harm our national security, where their greed is good dogma is ripping apart our sense of national and social solidarity, thereby fueling the rise of ugly political extremist movements like the National Socialists and various communist parties. And that's where I'm coming from. And, look, it's our plan in the future to have such personalities on the show. I would like to interview communists and other movements that you and I normally, and actually on this show, criticize very heavily. But the public, and I've had some of these people like Josh Neuer, for example, and others. I have had an ex-conservative guy on the TPUSA, Seven Surak, why he left conservatism. We had Joshua Neuer, who's one of the heads, until recently when he renounced fascism, but he was one of the founders of a fascist party in America in recent years. In 2012, the American Black Shirts Party. Now it's more of an Americanized party that's somewhat more democratically oriented in certain ways. But it's important for the people to understand why people get disillusioned with political and economic liberalism. And it's a lesson to the people, to the policymakers who might be listening to this show, or political writers and journalists and movers and shakers, that, guys, you got to do something. You got to do something. That has to come from, change has to come from the bottom, but also from the top. And that's just the bottom line. You have to attack the problems at the roots, not symptoms. Taking Tylenol for the problem is not going to make it go away. Instead, you have to restructure your lifestyle, in this case, to solve your health problems, especially if you're young or middle-aged. Same thing. Band-Aids are not going to work. Restructuring, core treatments, getting to the root of the problem, whether in health or whether in politics and economics, that's going to affect change. What do you think of that, Herschel? You like that analogy, right?
Well, I think that, there's a couple of things. So I'll start with this. Like, when it comes to communist, I'm going to say this the best way I can. I hope everybody in the audience can understand me. I am opposed to communism, not communist, if that makes any sense. And what I mean by that is this, is that when I meet most of the communists that I've had conversations with, most of the guys that have taken their time out of their day to come on the show, or me to call them, or just to talk, these are well-meaning people. And I will never say that their issues for getting into their movements weren't valid, because when I talk to people about, they became a communist because they watched Michigan just dry up to nothing when the manufacturing sector left. Like, that's a perfectly valid reason to me. Now, maybe I would say that maybe their efforts could have been placed in a better direction. Maybe that communism to me isn't the proper solution to the problem. But nonetheless, I believe that they're perfectly within their rights, and they're perfectly valid for feeling the way that they did and joining the movements that they did. So how do we stop that? How do we de-radicalize a population when it seems like every day people radicalize? I mean, like, and I've said this often enough that people know it by now, but like, I'm a radical. And I found myself radicalizing for the same reasons that fascists and communists do. It's because when I looked around the country early on into my political development, and I truly started to grasp that there was nobody out there that was looking out for me. Nobody. When you looked at the heads of the major political parties, if you looked at the officers at the local level, these people were power hungry little, bureaucrats and politicians that were only in it for their own means and their own ends. And when you make that realization, when you figure out that Trump is not the knight in shining armor that he was made out to be, or that your state governor, who was an incompetent moron at the best time, would support big business at every opportunity at the detriment of his own population. When you start to realize this, there's really only one way left to turn, unless you're willing to participate in that particular system, and that is to radicalize. Mm-hmm. So fixing that problem is never going to be easy, because what you have to show people like me, is that there is a moderate force in this country that genuinely cares about your well-being, that genuinely cares about your children's future, that your job pays you a little more. And as of right now, I don't know it. Like, I would, from my end of the patriotic populist, I would say that we're not a radical organization, in that we're we're not actively calling for the deaths of the billionaire elite. But by a Republican's account, yeah, we would be a radical organization. By a Democrat's account, more the same. And I don't want to be that way. Like, I would say that, I hate to use Huey Long in this instance because, you know, he was a very radical guy himself, but he had a quote that basically said, like, if I could be a normal politician, I would have been, but I couldn't. He couldn't do what he wanted to do as your standard elected official, because when your goal is to take a sledgehammer to the system, then you need to be willing to accept the fact that you're going to do things and you're going to believe in things that normal people are not going to believe in. Your average American, for better or worse, does not understand how attached at the hip our industry is to China, or the intricacies of our tax code that has been written exclusively in their favor. They don't understand that politicians, nearly every one of them, are bought and paid for, whether you like them or not. So for us, standing on the outside looking in, people that understand trade policy, tax policy, and the corruption of our government officials, we're going to sound crazy. And I found myself at times explaining that to people. Like, I don't want to be the guy that's having to always, you know, offer these radical solutions, because at the end of the day, I would love to just work and go home. I would love to not have to worry about where the United States is headed the next 20 years. And I think that that's something that we need to remember when we're trying to get these people to come out of these real radical organizations. Because, like, when we talk to kind of your rank and file communists, most of them don't belong to real radicals, but like, you do find these anarchist sects and these, you know, these tanky sects and these true neo-Nazi sects that are perfectly willing to use car bombs to achieve political gains. And that is a real threat. That's something that the American public does need to understand is happening. And the fact that they don't is probably the scariest thing that I can think of.
Well, yeah, and you also have communist organizations that also try to infiltrate the Democratic Party. I mean, that is not a conservative myth. That is a reality. The party press has admitted to that for decades upon decades. And you also have the neo-Nazis at times trying to infiltrate politics, law enforcement, and the military too as well. I'm not saying that it's, you know, on every street corner, but it is a looming threat. And when you have deteriorating conditions in the country, economically and politically and socially, you know, it's going to give rise to this type of radicalism. I would be considered, by the way, also a political radical by the standards of the neoliberal free market fundamentalist globalist consensus that's very corporate friendly, that has no problem with engagement with Russia and China, you know, and things of that nature. Our relationship with Saudi Arabia is another mass human rights violator. You know, I would be considered radical in the sense that I'd like to upend the entire neoliberal order. I would personally like a return to the pre-Reagan form of capitalism, where you have progressive populism serving to create a more conservative society. You don't reach the goals of conservatism, of course, by the way, by beating on the heads of, you know, LGBTQ people and saying, you know, that the gays and individual immigrants and whatnot are the cause of all our problems, and, you know, that Marxist professors, proliferation is the cause of all our problems. No, they're symptoms. You know, the proliferation of Marxist professors, that's a symptom of a larger structural problem. And again, you got to attack the things at the roots. You talk about Michigan and whatnot. Well, Joe Sims, who is now the leader of the Communist Party USA, he actually admitted in an article that he was thinking of abandoning communism back when the Berlin Wall fell in November of 1989. And he was thinking that maybe communism wasn't working. So he sounded like in his article, he was almost preparing to potentially abandon the CPUSA. Well, when he saw NAFTA being passed, more deindustrialization, poverty resulting from market fundamentalist policies, he decided that actually that Marxism-Leninism was the way to go. And, you know, the CPUSA, I mean, They're one of several radical sects in this country. Some of these radical sects, like Freedom Road Socialist Organization, the Party of Socialism and Liberation, and the ever radicalizing Democratic Socialist America, they're getting bigger. They're not getting smaller. They're gaining more socialist alternative. Another one that's getting bigger, from what I understand. I mean, I talked about it briefly in a recent interview on another program that the only ones organizing the tenants unions, according to our friend and a source in the Tampa St. Petersburg area in Florida, the only one that's organizing the tenants unions against the hikes in unaffordable rents is the local chapters of the Party in Socialism and Liberation in Tampa St. Petersburg. I mean, where the hell is the Republican Party? MIA, free market, the market works. Go read some von Mises and Milton Friedman. No, I say stick those books back on the library shelf or in the trash can, although I'm a librarian, so I don't believe in throwing away books. I mean, I got some of Friedman's works in my personal library, but that's irrelevant at this point. Figuratively, that shit's got to be thrown in the garbage, okay? Because they ain't helping you. You got the PSL organizing. Where the hell are the Republicans? Where the hell are the Democrats, for that matter? Are they out in the streets? No.
Well,
And
that's why we've seen the rise of
meanwhile, the working class, both white collar and blue collar, are split according to identity politics issues in vaccinations and everything else. I mean, in order to stand up against the totalitarian collectivists, as well as the private sector billionaires, oligarchs, and the greedsters, we have to be a united front. We have to be a united people. And, that's what I got to say about that. What are your thoughts, Herschel? I'm kind of on edge a little bit right now.
So this is I think it's a fundamental question we need to ask ourselves, and it's not an easy one to answer. So we've seen the Gilded Age and what it brought to us. We've seen the ravages of these oligarchs, these people that were more than willing to use extreme violence to meet their ends. We got a brief pause with the New Deal, and we got it again with Reaganism. At what point, as a people, do we start to realize that is who is responsible for nearly everything that's going on with us? Like, I think that when you stand back and you look at it, and you think that these people that put Reagan in power, these people that promoted Milton Friedman, these people that promoted von Mises, these people that helped draft NAFTA, that helped write trade policy after NAFTA, that helped write the tax code, these people are, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest enemy of the United States, and it's not even close.
Thank you.
Because, like, the commies, look, I don't want to live in a communist country. As far as, I still believe that there's a place for private enterprise in our country that is beneficial to us all. I believe that there is a certain amount of innovation that the market can bring that the government sector cannot. But at what point does the benefits outweigh the cost that it's bringing to us? Because for whatever supposed innovation that this country has produced in the last 40 years, I can tell you it's also produced one of the most unequal systems in human history, probably the most unequal system in human history. I can tell you that it's brought millions of people not into poverty, because the conservatives like to point out the fact that capitalism has lifted millions of people out of poverty, but it's brought them into a state of almost serfdom, because the Reagan model and what it is and what it means to us is that millions of people wake up every day, they go to work, they give 8 to 10 hours of their life away, plus whatever time they had to drive into work, and their entire life revolves around this fucked up system that somehow we've all agreed that is somehow the best system. And what I mean by that is that like these people, they're the ones that are funding these organizations that help drive social division. Like if you look at the benefactors to PragerU, the benefactors to the Daily Wire, the people, the various organizations that the Koch brothers had funded, like they have helped drive social division 10 times what any communist or fascist organization has. Now, this is not to say that I think that given the opportunity, the communist or the fascist wouldn't be worse. But what is in front of us is an absolutely ruthless system that has been set up and devised to be a ruthless system to help weed out any dissension amongst us. And that's something that also scares the crap out of me, because when you talk to people, when you tell somebody that, for example, because like I'm a big believer in the 30-hour work week. I believe that as a society, we have progressed to the point that we can start working less hours, that we don't need to spend as much time at the office. I think COVID proved this time and again with all of the work from home, shift in the job place. Mm. So, but when you tell people this, the first thing that they'll respond to with you is that, that you're just a lazy socialist or a communist or some shit like that.
Exactly.
Like the propaganda outlets have indoctrinated generations of people with this idea that the only way to be a successful person, the only way to be a meaningful member of society is to, give all of your life away. Work 5 days a week for the next 40 years until you might have a chance of retirement. And you see the rebellion at this system that is unfolding before our eyes. You see these organizations that are offering answers to problems that people have started to pick up on. And that makes it so much harder to deal with, because once an idea spreads, once people start to get the idea that, hey, maybe we're all getting fucked, that's a very dangerous situation to be in for the people that are trying to control the system. And you've started to see it with the backlash. You've started to see it with the massive propaganda pushes by major corporations that have, invested heavily in certain media that has said, like, again, PragerU, that is talking about how, labor unions are an inherently communist invention, that the minimum wage is a communist invention, and so on and so forth. Fill in communist is the cause of.
Which, in precisely those reforms to capitalism, are effective antidotes to communism, ironically, and other forms of totalitarian collectivism hostile to private free enterprise. The other thing is that a number, as I talk about in my book, Sowing the Seeds of Our Destruction, available on Amazon.com. Again, it's called Sowing the Seeds of Our Destruction, and I talk about it in my 2-volume book, my latest book, Turning the Page. A number of these libertarians and other so-called free market conservatives, many of them are staunch advocates of trade deregulation with authoritarian socialist states like Putin's Russia and communist China and communist Vietnam, Cuba, Venezuela, some of whom even work. Like Jack Kemp, one of the former advocates, architects really, of trickle-down economics. Well, Jack Kemp went to work for basically a front for the Venezuelan government under its then dictator, Hugo Chavez. He was like a staunch Reaganite, and yet through this company called, I think it's called was called Free Market Petroleum LLC, well, that had ties with the Venezuela. That was tied into ultimately the Venezuelans, which is a communist military dictatorship tied with Cuba, Turkey, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, etc. You name every bad guy in the world. So they're very hypocritical. A number of the sort of libertarian and conservative incorporated, they're only anti-communist, as one communist put it, by convenience. And what it is that, put it to me personally, what it is that they are anti-communist and anti-socialist when their class interests and wealth are threatened. But if they can make a buck from doing business with socialist despotisms and communist dictatorships and Islamic dictatorships that are normally hostile to capitalism, they'll be the first ones on the front lines advocating further trade deregulations with these various governments and countries. But, getting back to a more positive note, you mentioned the stirrings and revolts, the growth of these radical parties. We do see I wanted you to talk about, Herschel, if you can, some positive things on the horizon. You have the Kellogg strike. You have the recent unionization win in Buffalo, New York for the Starbucks workers. You have the Great Resignation, where you have more and more people just literally walking off the job. There was a story I was reading about a location of Chipotle, and apparently they were so short-staffed, they had massive lines, and the people just walked out. The workers just walked out and said, "The hell with this." And they just couldn't deal with it because corporate management did not want to hire more workers. Apparently, they wanted to save a couple of bucks, and people are refusing to work for low wages, for poor or no benefits, while these giant corporations are profiting massively. And again, this show, we have no issue with people being billionaires, or 5 yachts or 10 yachts. But when it comes literally and really at the expense of hardworking American men and women, yeah, we have a huge problem with that. But again, we have some positive developments on the labor front. So Herschel, did you want to talk about some of these strikes and union wins? I mean, now the Amazon warehouse thing is now they're revisiting that. So what's going on?
So 3 major points to be made here. Number one, the United States is experiencing its greatest upswing in the labor movement in at least 100 years. We're seeing people from all walks of life, conservative, liberal, and otherwise, that are starting to come to the realization that the entire rat race that we've been born into is nothing but a bullshit game to help fuel the bank accounts of a handful of ultra wealthy individuals. So what we're seeing now is that people who before COVID were trapped in this vicious cycle of, like I said, go to work, make a little money, barely get by. They realized, like, life is more than this. Life is more than just barely paying the bills and scraping by week to week. So they told these companies that were asking them to work 60, 70, 80-hour weeks for low wages that, you know what, go fuck yourself. Because you know what? I can make more money at home selling, I don't know, handmade artisanal baskets than I can make at this shithole job. And I don't have to deal with near the stress, near the hassle. So it's led to what a lot of think tanks are calling the Great Resignation, simply to avoid calling it the largest general strike in U.S. history. Because that's what it is at the end of the day. You're starting to see people, especially in the service industry, but it extends further than the service industry. You're seeing it in the healthcare system. You're seeing it in the transportation industry. We're like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to give 60 hours of my life away to some shitty boss that doesn't care about me. And it's why millions upon millions of people have quit. Now, again, this has nothing to do with some availability of federal money that they can leech off of, because almost all federal unemployment benefits, or all federal extra benefits, ended September 3rd, I believe. So that's not it. And it's damn sure not the little pittance sum of a stimulus check that people got across the country. Now, look, the stimulus check helped, but it's not enough to live off of. You know, a lot of people got $1,500 to $3,000. Now, depending on where you live, that might not be insignificant, but that's still not going to pay for bills very fucking long, especially if you're unemployed. So these people are quitting, not because there's a bunch of money waiting for them, but because they just can't put up with the bullshit anymore. Now, you look at Kellogg's, which to me right now is the most important strike in the United States by far. It's not even close. Because under any other circumstance over the years, if a union rejected a contract and the company decided to hire a bunch of scab laborers, it was over. But this time it's different. Because the labor movement is swinging up so fast, it's gaining momentum faster than I could ever have hoped for. People from across the country that have nothing to do with the Kellogg's workers are banding together to help them people win that fucking strike. A good example being when Kellogg's decided that they were going to hire 1,400 new scab laborers to replace the 1,400 union strikers. People from across the country were writing programs or bombing with their computers, job applications, fake job applications that crashed the Kellogg's hiring system. I read several reports of people, like I said, that wrote entire programs to do nothing but spam job apps hour after hour to Kellogg's to make sure that they could not vet through it to get to actual applicants. Union workers in Michigan, I think they belong to the Teamsters, would not assist Kellogg's in a derailing incident that occurred, and they had to call in workers from Ohio to come help them. People, Kellogg's is chronically understaffed. Chronically underproducing most of their necessary cereals right now. What that's meaning is that for the first time that I know of in recent history, a strike is being won by people outside of the strikers themselves. Now, look, the strikers, God bless you. You are doing what you're doing right now is it takes us an amount of bravery and courage to do that is unknown to most people, because what you're doing is basically you're putting your livelihood on the line. You could have kept working. You could have kept making it wasn't an insignificant amount of money. You were making a good wage, but you thought you needed better. So by God, you went on strike. That's how serious you were. And that takes a tremendous amount of courage. But right now, people that have nothing to do with Kellogg's are helping uphold this strike. And by God, you might win because of that. And that is something that would not have happened 5 years ago. Now, as far as
solidarity strikes, by the way, where workers from other unions and workplaces are joining this strike, and I think that is definitely a positive development. I mean, that has occurred in other countries throughout the world, both in Europe, even Latin America in recent years. You have literally, if one group of workers strike against arguably unjust conditions, then all the other unions and workers will band together. In my opinion, we need more of that in this country, not less. That needs to be amped up majorly, because ultimately we need to rebalance the scales between labor and management, between labor and the capitalists and the employers. And
Nevin, I think if you read into like the IWW, they're one of the things that they believe in absolutely is the power of a general strike, because there is no job that exists in a vacuum. So give me an example of an industry.
Let's say the telecommunications industry. Communication Workers of America is their union.
Okay, so the CWA, they have, I don't know if they're technically classified as linemen necessarily, but let's just say the people that string the fiber optic cables down the poles. So them dudes, they stop in the mornings and they get gas and food from a gas station. And they go home and they buy food from the grocery store that is produced by agricultural workers and then shipped over, across the country or around the world by transportation workers, and is delivered and then is, distributed to these companies. These guys, they cash their money at the bank. These guys, they buy stuff in the community. So these jobs exist within an interconnected economic system. There's no industry that you can think of that doesn't have dozens of other industries that support it. A good way of saying this, it's kind of a negative, but it is important for this conversation. If you look at the massive business closures that occurred in Flint, Michigan, and Detroit, that were not manufacturing related, but like the cafes that closed down, the gas stations, the tax offices, people like that existed to supplement the manufacturing sector of the U.S. economy. So what I'm saying is that these jobs, the sympathy strike, like what you're talking about right now, this is what it's getting to, these jobs exist by the support of several dozen other industries. And this is where general strikes, and this is where sympathy strikes, and this is where these things start to really make an impact. Because, so Kellogg's went on strike. But if there's nobody to deliver their goods, and there's nobody at the warehouse to receive them, and there's nobody that works in the stores to distribute, to put them on the shelves, and there's no cashiers to check them out, then Kellogg's can hire all the fucking scab labor they want to. They cannot break that strike. They cannot, or even if they do break that strike, even if they do hire 1,400 scab laborers like they're planning on, That
Mhm.
still doesn't mean that they can sell their goods at market, which is still a loss to them. That is why worker solidarity is so important. That is why standing up for the dude next to you is the most important thing that you can do as a worker. Because when we all stand together, from people from every background, from people from every industry, we can make it where these big companies cannot bully 1,400 people into giving into a contract, because we can make life such a living fucking hell for them that they have no other choice than to concede to the demands that are being made by the striking workers.
Well, that's why everything is interconnected. As Nick Hanauer, who I love, he's a multimillionaire businessman and activist, sort of a populist form of pre-Reagan capitalism is what he believes in. And he's terrific. And he talks about how the economy is more not a mathematical formula, it's more of an organism. It's an ecosystem, as he put it. Everything is interconnected. You know, the capitalists and the laborers, we're all interconnected and depending on each other. And that's why there needs to be, in order to achieve actual class solidarity and organic social unity of the nation, you need to have these strikes to rebalance the equation. It is so important. And really, labor unions are very good for the survivability and the durability of a free enterprise economy, an active labor union. Uh, because not only that, you have more people are able to have more money to put money into investments in Wall Street through pensions or stocks and other investments, buying foods at the grocery store, as you mentioned, gas at the gas station, toys at various department stores, going to the Target or whatever you want to call it, going to the local restaurants, the local barber shops, and everything else. Everything is interconnected, and this is where the free market people really refuse to understand it because they're just obsessed with greed is good under the guise of freedom. And the reality is I think Nick Hanauer was basically a billionaire. He's right. That's why he takes the position that financialization is bad for capitalism. Union busting is bad for capitalism. Free trade is bad for capitalism. Open borders, where you treat immigrants like slaves to the detriment of American workers and to the detriment of the immigrant workers, is bad for capitalism. Because why? Because these forces of your sort of Tea Party Reagan ideology is accelerationism in its purest form. It accelerates the contradictions of uncontrolled corporate capitalism. And that's what's going on right now. So before you guys, any of you listeners who are libertarians or fusionist Reaganite conservatives or whatever, or corporate Democrats in the mold of Joe Manchin, for example, and Kristen Sinema, before you call us socialists and communists, what Herschell and I represent is actually bad for fascism. It's bad for communism and really any anti-capitalist radical ideologies. That's the bottom line. So Herschell, do you have any other news to report on the labor front before I go into some of my little historical odds and ends?
Well, I would say that right now, taking out the big headlines, I have seen on the ground probably the biggest upswelling of labor conscientiousness that I think I could have ever expected. People that, under any other circumstance, I would have never heard some of the things come out of their mouth that have been said here lately. But it's very populist. It's very anti-corporate language that's being used right now by, hell, even conservatives. And I think as we go forward, as people, Bessemer was just a start. Kellogg's is a prequel to what's coming. As people start to really understand the breadth of the situation that we're in right now, I think that you're going to start to see strikes that are going to continue to pop up. You're going to see people unionizing. You're going to see people organizing. And it's not something that's going to go away. Like what the capitalists need to understand, when I say capitalist, I am meaning the ultra wealthy. I'm meaning the captains of industries per se. What these people need to understand is that what is started is not going to just fizzle out. you're seeing a movement. And movements like this don't come around often. The last time that we've seen a real labor movement was right at the tail end of the Gilded Age. And that led us to the New Deal. And across Europe, that led to the rise of fascism and communism as well. So this is a time where if these captains of industry intend to hold on to their multi-million-dollar homes and their lavish lifestyle, they need to make an investment. Not an investment to increase profit or not an investment to increase what the shareholders are getting, but an investment to keep their own head on their shoulders. Because in the words of Mark Blith, probably my favorite economist, the Hamptons is not a defensible position.
Mm-hmm.
And these strikes that are occurring right now, they could be a lot worse. Because right now, these people like at Kellogg's, they're peaceful. They're not burning buildings. They're not destroying assembly lines. But if you continue to not meet the demands that these people are offering, then radicalism is almost certainly to ensue afterwards. And these people will find themselves in a position where they really wish they would have gave that $5 an hour raise, especially when their head is literally on the chopping block.
Exactly. Now, I know the hour is coming up, so what I'm going to do is talk about some of my material on a separate episode of Odds and Ends. I'm going to be, relaunching that for a little bit since I have some more time and to spend on basically me and my daughter and the show and whatnot and other activities. So I'm going to do that because we are almost at the top of the hour. And I wanted to discuss some of our future plans. I'll go first, and then Herschel, you can talk about anything you want to do in the future that you've been doing right now for the show, because I know you've been doing a myriad of different things. For me, I attended the National Conservatism Conference back in late October, early November. I was here in Orlando, Florida, and it was a lot of fun. And what I took away from it was several things, some good victories for us. Number one, I gave out a bunch of cards that I developed for the Populist Patriot, and I'm going to show what it looks like over here. This is what our business card looks like. I mean, it might come up backwards for the audience, but here it is. And I handed out a bunch of these cards to various individuals, and it resulted in some new subscribers. I was impressed with the conference in the sense that you had individuals who are conservatives, including Republican activists, that were much more open to criticisms of market fundamentalism and corporate globalism. You definitely had the rise of communist China looming on the minds of the conference participants and that I spoke with. There were some speakers like Ted Cruz and Dave Rubin that still tried to marry populism and a form of nationalism with Reaganomics and this sort of small government ideology, but they were in the minority. The majority of individuals were very open to using state power to achieve some goals that are very legitimate in our eyes and others that you and I would take issue with. I gave my 2-volume book, Turning the Page, to a gentleman who's in the national security establishment. He worked on China during the Reagan years. His name is Michael Pillsbury, and he actually has done a mea culpa because he was one of the prime analysts who pushed for technology transfers and military sales and grants to communist China during the 1980s. And he has done now a mea culpa, and plans on writing a book that's very critical of this and reflected on his years doing this thing. And Pillsbury has been it for years and years and years, has become very much raising the alarm bells on the long-range plans of the Chinese Communist Party. So I handed him that. So now he hopefully gets exposure to the points of view that you and I propound. When we take a look at I've made some contacts, one of whom is in the Tampa St. Petersburg area. We'll just call him Kevin. That's his first name. No need to mention his last name. I had lunch with him when I made one of my trips to the Tampa St. Petersburg area, and he's definitely on board with populism, and he's open to Bernie's ideology too as well. Felt that Bernie didn't do such a good job in the last primary because he didn't focus as much on economic issues that unified, people of different races and genders, etc. So I plan on attending future national conservatism conferences. I plan on in February attending the CPAC conference, the Conservative Political Action Committee, because I think there might be some conservatives that will be favorable to our cause. And, one area I might want to explore is also going to some union meetings. I am a member of the Government Supervisors Association. Got my union card in my wallet, proud member, dues paying member. I am a union brother. And maybe going to their picnic on Saturdays, now that temporarily our library is closed on Saturday, the library that I manage. So that might be another thing, too, to network with people for the benefit of our show. And I recently was interviewed by Cliff Kincaid of America's Survival. He is a anti-establishment conservative. He's been in recent years absorbing more and more of a civic nationalist and populist way of thinking about economics and politics. He's a staunch anti-communist. And it was a very favorable interview for our show, for my books, for my ideas. There were many things him and I agreed with, some other things I didn't, but that's okay. You're not going to agree with everybody all the time, every time. We need to be in a position where we can expound our ideas to friendly or open-minded audiences. So I have some projects in the works, definitely some victories, small victories. This is all a team effort, not achieved just solely by one person. Yes, I did a lot of the legwork and whatnot, invested my money in the cards and the business cards and all the rest of it. And I plan on investing in the future for podcast microphones for Herschell and I, and possibly some webcams too as well to attach to our computer, possibly to improve video quality. So we got definitely some good projects going on my end. This is a great team effort. And just want to keep the momentum going. And now we have 450, last I checked, we have 453 subscribers. Herschell, before we go and conclude, I wanted you to talk about the news on your front and projects you're working on that you feel comfortable talking about for the betterment of the show and our cause.
So as of right now, I'm continuing on the coalition building, talking to various groups around the country, trying to forge alliances, going forward to, for lack of a better term, what you would call the United Front. I'm not going to name names right now because obviously while we're talking and negotiating, I don't want to, drop the ball per se. But I found myself in a position where I found that several organizations around the country definitely have shown a somewhat serious interest in uniting together to help drive political interest. I think that obviously as we go forward, I'm looking for more guests. I'm looking for more people to talk to, more people to interact with. So if you're a person, basically any political disposition, as long as you could call it populism, I'd be more than happy to talk to you. In the short term, I don't think I'm really planning anything that's going to be dramatically changing for the show, but I am working on a couple of really almost documentary-like films for our YouTube channel that is going to be posted on Nevin's channel.
Nice.
These are going to take a while. So basically, if you are a person that is well versed on the American economic system over the last 40 years, it would be beneficial for me definitely if you reached out and we started talking, because I could definitely use some input from various political backgrounds. Other than that, Nevin, I think everything's pretty good on my end, so I'll leave the show to you.
All righty. Well, I just wanted to conclude the show. It's really great to be back in the swing of things. We're going to have some more shows for the rest of this month. Herschel and I, as we mentioned earlier in this episode, we are going to have our New Year's special. When we're actually having that, I'm not sure. Herschel and I will talk about that, but it's going to happen. And no, looking forward to future episodes for the rest of this month and into the new year. It's been an awesome show. We covered a lot of ground. As I said, sometime this week, I'm going to be having my odds and ends from the office here. We're going to talk about a couple of historical finds. I've been getting back in the swing of things with my historical research. I got some new books to add to my personal library, including Peter Navarro's In Trump Time, which he details the splits between the corporate advocates, the corporate puppets, and the Tea Party libertarian types and pro-Wall Street types like Steve Mnuchin and Larry Kudlow and others, and the neocon generals versus people like Peter Navarro and Robert Lighthizer and others that wanted to take a firm stand against communist China and treat the COVID situation like we're in a war, basically, a biological war with China where we have to protect ourselves, not necessarily bomb China, but protect our population. So I look forward to checking that out. Some items I'll be talking about odds and ends and from the office here. That'll be my new name for my personal live stream recordings. So looking forward to that. And this has been a wonderful show, Herschel. It's so great to talk with you. And I look forward to future episodes. I'm thinking now that my Sundays are hopefully going to be freed up. Moving forward, I'd like to do some episodes Sunday evenings if you're available.
Yeah, sounds good, Nevin. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Pleasure as always, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, whatever's left of it. I don't want to say happy Monday because I'm not a Monday person, but hey, it's 5 days till Friday. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. God bless you all. Be safe. Be happy. When there's darkness, there's always light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you all. God bless America and good night.
Good night. Mm.